Folks, allow me to introduce my sister, the one who fixes toilets for a living. That was how my brother opened his speech at his hospital's donor gala, raising a flute of champagne in my direction. While 400 people in tuxedos turned to look at me, he grinned the way he always did. That easy, charming grin that made nurses giggle and board members write checks. She inspects sewer lines and grease traps. Somebody has to, I suppose. The laughter rolled through the ballroom like a wave. They thought it was a sweet older brother roast. What they didn't know was that I was carrying a federal inspection order in my clutch, and that in about 90 seconds I was going to shut down the brand new pediatric wing he was standing in front of. Before I tell you how I turned his proudest night into a public health emergency, do me a favor and tell me in the comments. Have you ever had your own family make you the punchline in a room full of strangers? I need to know I'm not the only one who learned to smile through it. I set my water glass down on the cocktail table. I remember the little ring of condensation it left on the white cloth. How I stared at it for one full second longer than I needed to, because I knew that the moment I looked up, there would be no taking any of it back. I walked toward the stage. My heels were not loud. I wear flats most days, the kind that don't slip on a wet floor. But that night I'd worn real shoes for the first time in years, and the sound of them on the polished concrete was the only sound in the room, because the laughter had died the instant people realized I wasn't laughing alone. I was walking with purpose. People can smell purpose. It scares them. My brother watched me come. He expected something he'd seen 100 times growing up. He expected me to get small, to duck my head, mutter something, find a corner. He had spent 30 years training me to disappear, and he had every reason to believe the training had held. It hadn't. I climbed the 3 steps to the stage. I reached out and took the microphone right out of his hand. He let me. He was so certain I was about to embarrass myself that he handed his own weapon to me out of pure curiosity, the way you'd hand your phone to a toddler to watch them fumble it. My brother's right about one thing, I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. I do inspect grease traps and sewer lines and ventilation ducts. I'm an environmental health and safety officer for the county. I let that sit. And as of 3 weeks ago, I'm the lead investigator assigned to the construction compliance review of this hospital, the one whose new wing we're all here to celebrate tonight. The room didn't get quieter because it was already silent. It got colder. I felt it, that drop in temperature when a crowd stops being an audience and starts being witnesses. My brother's face did something I had waited my entire life to see. The grin stayed for a second too long, frozen, like a photograph of a smile rather than a real one. Then it cracked. The color went out of his cheeks and pooled somewhere below his collar. I opened the slim leather folder I'd tucked under my arm. I'd practiced this part in my car for 20 minutes, and I still felt my hands wanting to shake, so I pressed them flat against the pages. Let's talk about this beautiful new pediatric wing, I said, looking out at the donors in the front rows, the ones in the good seats, the ones whose names were on the little brass plaques. 2 years of construction, $40 million, a ribbon cutting next Monday. I turned a page. The paper made a small dry sound that carried all the way to the back. But I did the final walkthrough this morning, before the catering staff got here, while it was still empty. I looked up. The fire suppression system on the 3rd floor isn't connected to anything. The sprinkler hits are decorative. They're glued in. A murmur started somewhere near the bar and spread. The medical gas lines, the oxygen lines that are supposed to run to every single one of those 40 pediatric beds, were installed by a contractor with no certification and never pressure tested. 2 of the rooms have oxygen ports cross-connected with the vacuum suction lines. I let my eyes move slowly across the room. If a nurse had turned the wrong valve on a child next week, she would have suctioned the air out of his lungs instead of giving him oxygen. Somewhere a woman said, "Oh my God," and didn't bother to lower her voice. I turned another page. The reason none of this got caught is that the inspection sign-offs were forged. Same signature, same date stamp, on documents the county never received and never reviewed. Somebody decided that paying for a real inspection cost more than printing a fake one. I closed the folder. So I want to be very clear with the people in this room who wrote checks tonight believing they were saving children's lives. You were. You just weren't told that the building you funded is currently a death trap, and that the man who told you it was ready. I turned and looked directly at my brother, knew. He found his voice then. "That's not," he started, and his hand came up like he was reaching for the microphone, and I stepped back out of his reach without breaking stride, the way you'd step away from a dog you've stopped being afraid of. "This wing does not open Monday," I said into the mic. "It does not open at all until it passes a full re-inspection, and I've already filed a stop work order with the state. Anyone who occupies this facility before then is in violation of county code, and that includes you, big brother." I set the microphone down on the podium. I didn't drop it. I thought about dropping it, the dramatic thud, but in the end I just set it down gently, the way you'd set down something that wasn't yours and never had been. Then I walked off the stage and down the center aisle, and 400 people who had laughed at me 60 seconds earlier moved their chairs to let me pass. I had been the family embarrassment for 29 years, for about 4 minutes that night. I was the only person in the building anyone could look at. Let me back up because none of this makes sense unless you understand how I got here. We grew up outside Columbus, Ohio. My father was a surgeon. My brother was going to be a surgeon. That was simply the shape of the family, the way some families are all musicians or all military. There was a doctor before our last name, and there was going to keep being one. And from the time I could understand language, I understood that my job was to become the next one. The problem was that I fainted at the sight of blood, genuinely. Masked out cold in 7th grade biology during the frog dissection, cracked my chin on the lab table, 4 stitches. My brother, 2 years older, never let me forget it. He had hands like our father, steady and sure, and a stomach to match. I had neither. What I had, it turned out, was a head for systems, for how things connected, where they failed, what it took to keep a building full of people alive without anyone ever noticing the building at all. But nobody in my family had a word for that, so they used the word they had: disappointment. When I told my father, the summer before college, that I wasn't going pre-med, that I wanted to study public health and environmental engineering, he didn't yell. I almost wish he had. He just set down his coffee and looked at me for a long moment and said, "So you want to be a glorified janitor?" Then he picked the coffee back up, and that was the end of the conversation and, in a real way, the end of my father. He paid for my brother's medical school. He paid for the down payment on my brother's first house. When I graduated near the top of my program, he didn't come. He told my mother he had a conference. There was no conference. I checked years later, the way you pick at a scar. There was no conference. My brother absorbed all of it, the praise, the money, the assumption of greatness. And he learned, the way kids do, that the fastest way to feel tall is to stand next to someone you've convinced everyone is short. So I became his material. Holidays, weddings, the occasional dinner I was foolish enough to attend, there was always a joke. The sewer joke, the toilet joke, the joke about how I'd gone to college to learn to smell bad professionally. He'd say it and look around for the laugh and get it, every time, because he was charming and I was quiet, and people sighed with charm. I want to tell you I rose above it with grace. I didn't. For most of my 20s, I was furious in a way I had no idea what to do with. I'd lie awake building arguments I'd never have the nerve to make. I'd rehearse comebacks in the shower, and then I'd show up to the next dinner and go small and silent all over again, because that was the only version of me the family had room for, and being small and present felt safer than being whole and exiled. What changed wasn't a moment of courage. It was a job. 6 years into my career, I got promoted to the county's construction compliance division. My work stopped being grease traps. It became hospitals, schools, nursing homes, the big projects, the ones where a cut corner doesn't cost a fine. It costs a life. And something happened to me that I didn't expect. I stopped being angry that my work was invisible. I started understanding that invisible was the whole point. The best inspector in the world is the one you never hear about, because the building never collapses, the fire never spreads, the child in the hospital bed simply breathes and gets better and goes home, and nobody ever knows how close it came. I had spent my life ashamed of doing the work that keeps people alive in the dark. And one day, standing in an empty ICU at 6 in the morning, checking oxygen pressure with my own 2 hands, I just stopped being ashamed. My brother, of course, knew none of this. To him, I was still the kid who fainted at the frog. He didn't ask about my job, because he assumed there was nothing there to ask about. That assumption is the most expensive mistake he ever made. Here's the part I've never told anyone. The compliance file on his hospital's new wing landed on my desk 4 months before the gala. I didn't ask for it. The county assigns by region and rotation, and it simply came up my number. I saw his hospital's name on the cover sheet and I felt my stomach drop, because the first thing I thought, the honest first thing, was, I have to recuse myself. You can't investigate your own family. It's a conflict of interest. It's the right thing to do. I drafted the recusal email that same afternoon. I never sent it. I never sent it because I started reading the file. And the deeper I read, the colder I got. The inspection records didn't add up. The contractor on the medical gas lines was a company that had been cited twice in another county and dissolved and reincorporated under a new name with the same owner. The sign-off dates were impossible. Inspections supposedly completed on days the building wasn't even enclosed yet. Somebody was forging documents. Somebody was going to open a children's hospital wing that hadn't been checked, and they were going to do it on schedule and under budget, and collect a great deal of applause for it. And I knew, the way you know things about your own blood, that if I recused myself, the file would go to whoever was next in the rotation, and that person would be overworked and trusting and would see a hospital with a sterling reputation and a famous surgeon's name attached, and would probably wave it through. Quiet. Efficient. The way things get waved through every day until the day they don't, and people die and everyone acts surprised. So I made a choice I'm still not entirely sure was clean. I kept the file. I told myself it was about the kids, and that part was true, but I'd be lying if I said there wasn't another part, a smaller, older part that had been waiting a very long time to walk into a room where my brother was the tallest man there, and turn on the lights. I did the work properly. That mattered to me more than anything. I documented everything twice. I brought in a second inspector from a neighboring county to verify my findings, so no one could ever say I'd cooked them. I built a case so clean that the relationship between me and the man I was investigating wouldn't matter, because the evidence would stand on its own in any courtroom in the country. And then I waited. I could have served the stop work order in his office on a Tuesday. Quiet, professional, an email and a phone call. He'd have hated it, but he'd have managed it. He'd have hired a crisis firm, blamed the contractor, found 3 city council members who owed him favors, and within a year, he'd have spun the whole thing into a story about how he personally caught the problem and saved the children. I'd seen men like him do it before. The truth is soft. Money and charm are hard. Left alone in a quiet room, money and charm win almost every time. So I didn't give him a quiet room. I waited until he gathered 400 witnesses of his own choosing. I waited until he stood in front of the donors and the board and the press and built himself a stage. I let him pour the champagne. I let him write the speech. I let him make me the punchline one last time, 'cause I needed every single one of those people to hear the truth at the same moment, in a room where there was no spin fast enough to catch it. He built the stage. I just walked up the stairs. The service hallway behind the ballroom smelled like floor wax and warming trays. I'd almost made it to the loading dock when I heard the doors bang open behind me. I didn't have to turn around. I'd have known that walk anywhere. Fast and heavy and off balance, a man who has never once in his life had to chase anyone. You stop right there. His voice had lost the warm courtroom polish he used on donors. It came out raw and scraped. I turned around slowly. He stood 10 feet away. His bow tie crooked, his face a deep blotchy red, his chest heaving. The surgeon, the charmer, the golden child, and underneath all of it just a frightened man who had finally found something he couldn't smile his way out of. "You think you can do this to me," he said, "in front of everyone? You ungrateful little." He came closer, and his hand shot out and closed around my arm, hard. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. I didn't pull away. "Let go," I said. "Or what?" He leaned in. I could smell the champagne on him gone sour. "You'll write me up? You'll file a little form? You spiteful, jealous nobody. I gave you a name. Our father gave you everything. And you've spent your whole life resenting us because you couldn't cut it. And now this? You'd burn down a children's hospital just to get back at me." And there it was. The thing I'd waited my whole life to hear him say out loud, because the moment he said it, I understood it had never once been true. For years I thought he despised me because I'd failed, because I hadn't become a doctor, hadn't earned money, hadn't carried the name. But standing in that hallway, watching the panic come off him in waves, I finally saw it clearly. He didn't despise me for failing, he needed me to fail. He had built his entire sense of himself on being the tall one, and a tall man needs someone short to stand next to. My smallness wasn't a disappointment to him. It was load-bearing, and I had just taken it out from under him in front of everyone he wanted to impress, and now the whole structure was coming down, and he could not understand why, because in his version of the world it simply wasn't allowed to. "I didn't burn anything down," I said. "I turned the gas off before it could. That's the entire difference between you and me, and you've never once understood it." He shook my arm. "I will end you. Do you know how many people I know on that county board? I'll have your job by Friday. I'll have you blacklisted in 3 states. You will never inspect a doghouse again. You're not listening." I said it quietly, and the quiet stopped him for a second. "You think this is over. You think I came here to humiliate you, and now we negotiate." I pulled my arm free with one sharp twist, and he stumbled, genuinely surprised that I was stronger than the girl in his memory. "It's not over. It hasn't even started." That was when he made his real mistake. He'd always been smart, in the way that surgeons are smart, fast and confident and used to being the most capable person in the room. But he'd never in his life been in a room he didn't control. And panic makes a controlling man stupid. He stepped back and he spread his arms wide, taking in the hallway, the ballroom, the whole gleaming building he thought he owned. "You want to play hardball?" he said. And a horrible calm came over him, the calm of a man reaching for the gun he knows is loaded. "Fine. Let's play. You think your little report scares me? I'll tell you exactly how this goes. The contractor takes the fall. I never saw those forged documents. I'm a surgeon, sweetheart, not a building inspector. I trusted my people. And when the dust settles, I'll still be standing and you'll be the bitter sister who tried to torch her own brother's life's work over a childhood grudge." "The contractor," I repeated. "Briarwood Mechanical." He smiled, ugly now, sure of himself again. "Good luck pinning anything on me. I never signed a thing. I kept my hands clean. I always keep my hands clean." "You think I got where I am by being careless?" He laughed, and it bounced off the concrete. "I approved a budget. That's all anyone can prove. I approved a budget and trusted licensed professionals, and if those professionals cut corners, that is a tragedy I will mourn at the press conference." He took a step toward me, lowering his voice, and the cruelty in it was almost gentle. "And here's the other thing, little sister. You go after me. You'd better think about Mom. Who pays for her assisted living? Who covers the part Medicare won't? Me. I write that check every month. You make me radioactive. You make my money disappear. And where does that leave her? On a wait list for a county home? In your spare room?" He smiled. "You always did love playing the hero. Just remember the hero's the one who put Mom on the street." I let him finish. I let every word land, because I needed him to commit to all of it, the contractor, the clean hands, the threat, the whole architecture of the lie he was about to spend the next year telling. Then I reached into my clutch and took out my phone. "Briarwood Mechanical," I said. "The company you say cut the corners without your knowledge." I tapped the screen and turned it around so he could see. "This is the incorporation filing. Briarwood Mechanical is a single-member LLC. The single member is a holding company in Delaware, and the holding company," I let him read it, watched his eyes move across the screen and stop, "is registered to you. You owned the contractor you're planning to blame. You hired yourself, paid yourself, and signed off on yourself, and you've been quietly pocketing the difference between the certified work you billed for and the uncertified work you actually did on a children's hospital. The red drained out of his face the same way the color drains out of a wound right before it goes white. You can't, those records are sealed. They're public, I said. You just have to know which clerk's office to ask. I do this for a living. You always thought that meant I was beneath you. It actually means I know exactly how to find the body when somebody as careless as you tries to bury it under a shell company with a pretty name. You stupid. His hand twitched toward his own phone. Delete it. Delete all of it. Or so help me, I stop paying for Mom's care tonight. I'll call the facility in the morning and you can explain to her why. Call them, I said. He blinked. Go ahead. Right now. Put it on speaker. I held his gaze. Call Maplewood Senior Living and tell them you're cutting off her payments. His thumb hovered. Then, because he couldn't imagine I'd dare him to do a thing I wasn't sure of, he dialed. He put it on speaker, his eyes on me the whole time, waiting for me to crack. The line picked up. Thank you for calling Maplewood Senior Living. This number is no longer in service for resident accounts. Please. He hung up before it finished. His face had gone slack. I moved her in March, I said. She's at Lakeside now. Memory care, the good one. The one with the garden she likes. I've been paying for it out of my own account since the day I opened that file, because I knew the second I read it that you'd reach for her the moment you got scared. I know you. I've had 30 years to study you. You always go for the softest thing in the room. I let that sit. You just didn't realize I'd already moved her out of your reach. He stared at me like I'd grown a second head. The story he'd told himself about me my whole life. The helpless one. The dependent one, the sister who'd fold the second things got real, came apart in his face in real time. You never saw me, I said. Not once. You were too busy checking your own reflection in every room you walked into. So you never noticed that while you were collecting applause, I was building a life you couldn't touch. I saved. I planned. I learned exactly how your world works so that one day, if I ever needed to, I could take it apart with my bare hands and a public records request. He slid down against the wall until he was sitting on the floor of his own service hallway in his $1,000 tuxedo, next to a cart of dirty dishes. Please, he said. The word came out small. I had never heard him say it before. Not once in our whole lives. Please. There's money. I can make this right. We can figure something out. You and me. We're family. I almost laughed. Instead, I turned my phone around one more time and showed him the screen. The call was still connected. The timer was still running. 41 minutes. This is Investigator Sandra Okafor with the county, I said, and the gentleman from the State Attorney General's Construction Fraud Unit, who's been on the line since you walked into this hallway. They've heard everything, the contractor, the clean hands, the forged sign-offs, all of it. I crouched down to his level. The way you talk to someone who'd just been in an accident. You confessed to a felony in a building you knew was wired wrong. To the people whose job it is to prove it. I didn't have to build a case against you, big brother. I just had to give you a quiet hallway and enough rope. The phone in his hand hit the floor. I stood up. The loading dock door was 10 feet behind me, and through the little window in it, I could see the blue and red lights already turning in the parking lot, soundless from in here. Patient. I walked out past him. I didn't run. I'd spent my whole life walking quietly out of rooms, making myself small enough to slip through the door without anyone noticing. It felt strange to do it this time and not feel small at all. Outside the night was cool and it smelled like rain coming. I got into my car, my ordinary little car with the county parking sticker and the travel mug in the holder, and I sat for a second with my hands on the wheel. Then I called my mother. It was late, but she keeps odd hours now, and she picked up on the second ring and said my name in that bright, surprised way she has, like she's delighted I exist. "Hi, Mom," I said. "I just wanted to hear your voice." We talked about her garden, about a finch that had built a nest outside her window. She didn't ask about her son, and I didn't tell her. And that conversation could wait for a kinder day. I just listened to her talk, and somewhere underneath the talking I noticed that the thing I'd carried my whole life, the low constant hum of needing them to finally see me, had gone quiet. Not triumphant. Just quiet, like a tooth that's ached so long you forget it's there until the day it stops. I pulled out of the lot as the first real drops hit the windshield. In the mirror I could see the lit-up entrance of the hospital, the valet stand, the people starting to spill out into the rain in their evening clothes, looking up at a building they'd been so proud of an hour ago. Here's the thing I know now that I wish I'd known at 20. When somebody decides you're nobody, they stop watching you. They turn their back. And a person nobody is watching can go anywhere, learn anything, build anything, completely undisturbed. They called me the invisible one like it was an insult. It took me 30 years to understand it was the best gift they ever gave me. You can't defend yourself against someone you never bothered to see coming. So if there's somebody in your life who's decided you're small, let them keep believing it. Stay quiet. Do the work. And one day, when it matters, walk up the stairs. For 30 years I believed the quiet was a punishment. Now I understand it was a workshop. Every dinner my brother turned me into a joke. Every time my father skipped graduation, every holiday I shrank myself to fit the corner of the room. I was being left alone. And a person left alone long enough learns to build things nobody asked her to build. I built a career in the dark. I learned how buildings breathe and where they break, and how a forged signature smells different from a real one. None of that came from talent. It came from being overlooked so completely that I had all the time in the world to become good at something they refused to look at. What happened in that ballroom wasn't luck, and it wasn't revenge in the way people mean it. It was cause and effect, plain as a chain. My brother cut corners because he believed no one with real power was watching the corners. He believed that because he'd spent his whole life deciding that the people who watched the corners, the inspectors, the janitors, the unglamorous ones, didn't matter. He built his entire downfall out of his own contempt. I didn't trap him. I just refused to be small on the one night it would have saved him. I think a lot now about what actually carried me through it. There were 3 things, and I didn't have all 3 at once for most of my life. The first was simply doing the work right, even when no one would ever clap for it. Checking the oxygen line at 6 in the morning in an empty room, because a child I'd never meet was going to breathe through it. You do the right thing in the dark or you don't really do it at all. The second was learning. I couldn't outcharm my brother and I couldn't outshout my father, so I outstudied them. I learned exactly how their world worked, the shell companies, the public records, the codes, until I could take it apart with nothing but knowledge and patience. The third was the hardest. It was staying in a life that told me I was nobody, getting up for the next shift, the next degree, the next quiet year, when walking away would have been so much easier. Endurance isn't loud. Mostly it just looks like showing up again. If you're the overlooked one in your family, the disappointment, the punchline, I won't tell you it stops hurting. It doesn't, not entirely. But I'll tell you this. Keep your hands clean, even when theirs aren't. Keep learning the things they think are beneath you, and keep going, especially on the nights you're certain it doesn't matter. They turned their backs on me, and in turning away they stopped watching, and a person nobody watches can become almost anything. Stay quiet. Do the work. And when the night finally comes that it matters, walk up the stairs.